Ever marvelous indeed. I am Paul Chion, joined here by Brian Braun-Duin from Team KMC Genesis, Magic Pro League competitor. And for some reason, you decided to shy away from the decks of all your teammates and chose to play something else. What are you playing in the tournament?
So I'm playing the Urza ThopterSword deck.
Okay.
It's just a deck that I love.
Okay,
so.
now, is this deck, do you think that this deck is actively good against the graveyard-based strategies that people have brought to the tournament?
Yeah, I think it's one of the few decks that's favored against the Hogak deck. It's definitely ahead in game one, which is rare. Right. And then after sideboard, things can be tough, but I still think you will generally be able to get one of those games.
Now, why is this deck specifically so good against the Hogak deck?
So Ensnaring Bridge is basically the main reason why. Hogak doesn't really attack through the bridge very well. Vengevines either, so...
Right, I mean, you can have a full hand and Hogak still can't get through, so...
That's right,
makes
yeah.
a lot of sense. All right, well, let's hop into the deck here and see what we're working with. We got, wait a second, 4 copies of Arkham's Astrolabe, Chromatic Star, Mishra's Bauble, and Mox Opal. All right. Tell us about this new card here.
Yeah, so it's just a really cheap artifact that cantrips.
Right.
And it's just really efficient at what it does in that regard, and that just makes it good enough because you want access to early artifacts to turn on Mox Opal, make Urza better, make Thopter Foundry better, and so on. So just having a one-mana artifact that cantrips is just a nice addition to this style of deck.
Okay, so this is basically a strict upgrade to kind of what we've had in the past with, you know, maybe additional copies of Chromatic Star and Chromatic Sphere?
Yeah, like with Chromatic Star and Chromatic Sphere, you have to invest an extra mana into. You don't get the card right away, basically. Like you have to then sacrifice it to get your card out of it. Whereas this just gives you the card right off the bat.
Right, and it just always gives you that mana fixing too whenever you need it.
Yeah, like the mana fixing is very relevant too.
Okay, makes a lot of sense. All right, moving on here, we have a little bit of ramp here. Not a lot. We got 2 copies of Mindstone, 3 Wellsprings, and a Pyrite Spellbomb. So why the Wellsprings?
So one of the issues with this deck is that Urza is such a phenomenally powerful card, but when you don't draw an Urza, sometimes your deck just doesn't do anything.
Sure.
So I wanted to build this deck to have a more mid-range game plan, and that involves Chromatic Star, Ichor Wellspring, and their interactions with Thopter Foundry and Psi Master Thopterist, where you can sack a Wellspring to a Thopter Foundry, make a Thopter draw a card. Same with Chromatic Star. Same with Psi, you can sack the Wellsprings to draw cards. And so that just gives you like an engine in games where you don't have Urza, where you can still play a game of Magic and maybe buy yourself time.
Okay, so you can actually maybe try and win a more of a mid-range style game and not lean so heavily on the Urza.
I've definitely won plenty of games that involved, playing a side, making a bunch of Thopters, and putting a sword on one of them, like just hard equipping it and just going to town. So.
Okay, all right, nice. Well, speaking of Psi, moving to the next slide here, we have 2 copies of Psi Master Thopterist, and we have some tutor effects here, 2 copies of Word of Invention, and 2 new cards again, Goblin Engineer.
Yeah, so Psi, what I said before, it's just a really good mid-range piece for when you don't have an Urza, and it also interacts really favorably with Urza and interacts favorably with Sword of the Meek itself. Is like you can sacrifice the sword to Psi, and then when you cast a new artifact, you get a Thopter that brings it back. Okay. So it's just just endless fodder there.
So just more cards that interact very, very well with Sword of the Meek.
Yes.
Okay.
And then Goblin Engineer is just a great toolbox to put sword into your graveyard when you have a Thopter Foundry to assemble the combo. But also sometimes in matchups where it's not going to die to removal, you have the ability to put a hate piece in your graveyard, like a bridge or a pithing needle or whatever's good against your opponent's deck, and then on the following turn you can swap an artifact to get that card back into play. Okay. And if it's like a Wellspring or a Star, you get to draw a card off the exchange.
Okay, so was there any consideration here, because both of these cards, kind of their purpose is to search out an artifact. Why did you decide to go with the 2-2 split here instead of 4 of 1?
So War of Invention is an incredibly powerful card, but sometimes it's really hard to cast. And like this deck's playing like Urzas and Psis and all these other cards that don't enable War of Invention that easily. Or at least not early in the game. So I don't want to overload on that kind of a card. And also there are times where it's actually not as impressive as it is in a deck like Lantern, where your entire deck is cards that you want to find with War. Sometimes I'm worrying for an Ichor Wellspring, and it's not really that great. So
yeah, 5 mana's worth of tapping just to draw a card isn't especially powerful. Okay,
Yeah.
I see. So this deck, this is kind of an extra bonus, but it's not built specifically to fully abuse the power of invention, right?
Yeah, like War is another great way to find a Thopter Foundry or sword, but it's not an essential piece of the deck.
Okay, all right. Moving on here, we have some utility, I guess, tutor targets, I want to say, for some of those cards that we talked about. Ensnaring Bridge, Grafdigger's Cage, Nihil Spellbomb, and Pithing Needle.
Yeah, so Ensnaring Bridge is just an incredibly powerful card still, and a lot of the lists only play one copy, but I don't like that because in a lot of matchups you really just want to actually just draw the card.
Right.
And sometimes even having access to 2 copies is good, like against Phoenix, for example, they have a Braid after sideboard. You want to have access to a second bridge if you can. And then for these other cards, like they're just kind of really good in the matchups where they're good, and it's worth main decking them because at the very worst, they'll sacrifice to a Thopter Foundry and make a Thopter.
Okay, so there's a little extra value because, you know, a lot of these toolbox cards, they're really good in certain matchups, but let's say you draw Grafdigger's Cage against Jund, it's not going to do a whole lot, but because you just need a bunch of artifacts anyways, it still synergizes well with a lot of things that you
Yeah, like it can still turn on a Mox Opal, tap for mana with an Urza. There's a lot of ways, you know, make a Thopter with Sai. Sure. It can get some value even in matchups where it's a dead card.
All right, well, moving on to the next slide, this allowed us to actually complete one of the squares of bingo because you are playing 3 new cards from Modern Horizons. We got Thopter Foundry, Urza, Lord Articier, and Sword of the Meek. Let's start with this one.
Okay, Urza is like kind of a busted card, really. Yeah. It's just an incredibly, it doesn't look that good on the surface,
right.
But you play it, you get a construct. Sometimes that construct wins the game by itself because it's massive, and other times Urza just generates an obscene amount of advantage through the mana, like how much mana it can generate. Like if you assemble Thopter Foundry and Sword of the Meek, that's infinite Thopters, infinite mana, and you can cast your entire deck with Urza's 5 mana ability.
Yeah.
So the card is really good in fast matchups where you need to assemble the combo really fast because sometimes you can win on turn 4 or even turn 3 if you have a really good hand. But then even in grindy matchups, you can just start activating the 5 mana ability of Urza, tapping like these Grafdigger's Cages and stuff that aren't doing anything else, and just start churning cards off the top of your deck.
Yeah, I feel like the good metric for just determining the power level of a legendary creature or legendary card is if you play 4 copies of it in your deck, that means it's probably completely ridiculous in the deck that you're playing it in, right?
Yeah, I also would say there's no room for flavor text on it, so it's got to be pretty good. That's a lot of text.
Well, we had to, when we create the actual Urza card, we have to make it stand out, we have to make it pop, we have to make it exciting. So, you know, we decided to add a lot of power to this one to see if people would eventually put it into their decks, and it sounds like the design team got there with Urza, Lord Articier.
Well, there's only 1 power, but yeah, I see what you're saying.
I feel like it generates a little more than 1 power.
Often, yeah.
All right, finishing the deck off, we have the mana base here, of course. We have our fetches and shocks, but you still managed to fit in the 1 copy of the Inventor's Fair.
Yeah, so I played a long time with Inventor's Fair and Academy Ruins, and I was finding out that I wasn't using Academy Ruins very often.
You can't get back Urza with it.
You cannot, no. Yeah. But I was using Inventor's Fair a lot, actually, because sometimes you play Urza, you have access to 10 plus mana, and so that you can play an Urza, activate Inventor's Fair immediately, get whatever combo piece you're missing, and just win that turn.
Okay.
So that was coming up quite frequently. The card was really overperforming.
All right. Did you get anybody else to play this deck by any chance?
No.
So you were the only one. Everybody else is running the Hogax, but you decided you're the one
I'm
who's going to
metagame
against your team.
That's right.
You play the Urza.
I was like, oh, you guys are playing Hogax? Leyline in the sideboard, please. Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, it is the most played card in the tournament, to be fair. Yeah. And then, of course, rounding out the deck, we have the Snowlands to be able to, of course, cast the Arkham's Astrolabe. Right.
Yep.
All right. Well, I mean, this deck looks really exciting. You know, I mean, it's always nice to see something new coming out of the tournament. You have a lot of new stuff, so best of luck for the rest of the tournament, Brian. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks.
This was Urza ThopterSword.